There's a moment in life, maybe you've already felt it, when everything you've been taught to chase suddenly loses meaning. You look around and nothing fits anymore. The job that was supposed to make you proud feels like a cage. The relationship that was meant to complete you starts suffocating your spirit. And that stable life you were building brick by brick, it starts to collapse, not because you failed, but because it was never yours to begin with. That's when the voice inside begins to whisper the question you've been avoiding. What if I've been living someone else's version of success? And the moment you entertain that thought, the world you knew starts to crack. Since childhood, we are handed a script. Be good, do well in school, go to college, get a job, work hard, make money, get married, have kids, retire. Then maybe, you'll be allowed to rest, if there's anything left of it. This path is not given to you out of malice. It's sold to you as safety, as love, as the only way to be somebody. But here's the trap. This path doesn't ask who you really are. It doesn't care about your soul's desires. It rewards obedience, not authenticity. It punishes exploration, not mediocrity. The system is not broken. It works exactly as intended. Its goal is not to help you discover your truth. It's to keep you producing, consuming, conforming. And here's the most painful part. The moment you step off this path, when you stop following what they told you to chase, you don't feel free. You feel lost. Why? Because your inner compass was never built. You only learned how to follow signs, not how to navigate your own truth. You only learned how to fit in, not how to be whole. So when the signs disappear, when the structure collapses, it feels like failure. It feels like abandonment, but it's not. It's initiation. Feeling lost is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of disconnection from the programming that once kept you numb. You were trained to associate confusion with danger, silence with failure, uncertainty with doom. But what if that's a lie? What if feeling off track is exactly where your real journey begins? Let me ask you something uncomfortable. How many of your deepest choices were truly yours? Did you choose your career because it lit your soul on fire? Or because it looked good on paper? Did you say yes to that relationship because it made your spirit grow? Or because you were tired of being alone? Did you build your life out of passion or out of fear? These aren't accusations, they're invitation. Because until you dare to question the script, you will keep acting in someone else's play, dying a little more every day without even realizing. The system rewards you for staying on the path. It applauds you for staying quiet. It gives you medals for playing roles that don't match your essence. And when you finally get tired of pretending, it gaslights you. It tells you you're ungrateful, that you're sabotaging yourself, that you're lost. Wait, but what if you're not lost? What if you've just stopped following a map that was never made for your soul? The truth is, most people don't wake up until the pain of staying asleep becomes unbearable. And when that moment comes, they begin to see the walls that were always there. Walls made of expectation, traditions, fear, shame. This is why the system fights so hard to keep you distracted. It floods your senses with noise, social media, endless productivity, comparison, approval. Because silence is dangerous. Silence is where truth speaks. And once you hear your truth, you become impossible to control. But here's where it gets even more real. Waking up doesn't mean instantly finding clarity. It means stepping into fog, into wilderness, into your own uncharted territory. There are no signs, no instructions, no applause. Just you and the raw, unfiltered voice of your intuition after years of being buried beneath noise. And that voice, it doesn't scream. It whispers. It whispers, this isn't your home. It whispers, you were made for more. It whispers, start walking, even if you don't know where you're going. This is the moment most people turn back. The silence is too loud. The road is too empty. The fear is too real. They return to the path, to the illusion, to the cage, because at least it's familiar, but not you. Because if you've made it this far, it means the lie is no longer enough. The mask itches. The old life doesn't fit. And deep down, you know something is dying. Not because you're broken, but because something new is trying to be born. And that birth requires a death. The death of who you thought you had to be. The death of the version of you who was always smiling, always performing, always surviving, the version of you that was never truly you. Let that part go. Let it dissolve. You don't need to fight for a seat at a table where your soul is not welcome. You don't need to chase what was never aligned with your spirit. You don't need to beg for breadcrumbs when your soul was designed to feast on truth. And the moment you stop chasing, when you stop needing the world's map, you finally realize something extraordinary. You're not without direction. You're just finally walking without a leash. Once you begin to walk without the leash, without the pre-approved map, you start encountering an unexpected reality. Most people will try to pull you back, not because they are evil, but because your freedom threatens their illusion of safety. You become a mirror. Your refusal to follow the herd reminds them of the pact they made with fear. Your courage to be lost, to not know, to feel deeply. It's unbearable for those who silence themselves just to survive. And so, they'll call you reckless, irresponsible, lost. But they're wrong. You're not lost. You're just no longer domesticated. See, the world is deeply uncomfortable with anyone who cannot be predicted. That's why they don't just want you to be good. They want you to be manageable. If they can label you, they can contain you. If they can scare you, they can guide you. If they can shame you, they can keep you small. But the moment you stop living for validation, the leash snaps. You begin to realize something no one ever taught you. Freedom is lonely at first, because the world is full of people pretending to be happy, pretending to be okay, pretending they want what they were told to want. And when you stop pretending, you leave the club. You leave the club of the agreeable, the club of the silent, the club of the exhausted, who keep dragging themselves through a life that doesn't fit. This is why the second stage of awakening is grief, not joy. Because before you feel free, you feel alone. You start mourning the version of you that everyone loved. The one who didn't ask too many questions. The one who played by the rule. The one who smiled while dying inside. That version got applause. That version got invited to everything. That version made people feel comfortable. But that version wasn't you. And when you stop performing, people leave. They stop recognizing you. Or worse, they try to fix you. They say, "You've changed," as if it's a betrayal, as if growth is a sin. But what they're really saying is, "You're not making me comfortable anymore. Let them go." You weren't born to comfort anyone's illusion. You weren't born to fit inside a system built to keep you asleep. You were born to disrupt, to awaken, to unlearn. And that mission requires solitude. It requires silence. It requires that you be willing to disappoint everyone but your own soul. And here's something most people never admit. Confusion is holy. Yes, confusion is sacred. Because it means the old story is dying and the new one hasn't arrived yet. It means you're in the liminal space, the spiritual hallway, between who you were and who you are becoming. And that space is terrifying, but necessary. There's a word for it in ancient traditions: liminality, the in-between, the death of identity before the birth of truth. In tribal rites of passage, the initiate is taken away from the community, stripped of their name, of their clothes, of their attachment, and brought into the wild, into the dark, into the unknown, not as punishment, but as transformation. In the West, we've forgotten these rituals. We've pathologized them. Now we call them depression, identity crisis, burnout. But what if those aren't diseases? What if they're sacred signals that your soul is shedding its skin? Because that's what awakening feels like, a spiritual molting, the cracking open of everything that once protected you, but now imprisons you. And in that cracking, something begins to emerge. It's not a plan, it's not a goal, it's a frequency, a subtle knowing that your path is not forward, but inward, that your next step won't come from logic, but from listening, that your life is no longer about impressing others, but about remembering yourself. This is the paradox of awakening. You don't find answers. You lose questions. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What feels true?" That shift changes everything. You begin to make strange decisions. You leave places that once felt like home. You walk away from people who did nothing wrong, but also did nothing real. You stop chasing outcomes. You stop justifying your feeling. You start honoring your body, your energy, your intuition. And yes, it's scary, because when you stop looking outside for approval, you have to build an internal compass from scratch. And that compass doesn't speak English. It speaks impulses, sensations, hunches, that gut feeling you always had but were told to ignore. That's now your guide. And when you follow it, truly follow it, you begin to see how many parts of your life were built on compromise. Not because you were weak, but because you were trying to survive. But you're not here to survive. You're here to come alive. And coming alive is messy. It's inconvenient. It doesn't fit neatly into schedules or spreadsheets. It makes you cancel things, say no to things, walk away from things you begged for just a year ago. Because now you're operating on truth. And truth doesn't apologize. It doesn't shrink. It doesn't explain. It doesn't perform. It just is. And when you begin to live from that place, everything starts to reorganize around you. Not immediately, not without resistance, but slowly, the right people start to show up, the right energies, the right opportunities, because you're finally emitting your real signal, not the distorted one you used to send out just to be liked. And when that happens, you don't need a map. You are the map. The moment you stop broadcasting the version of yourself that others trained you to be, you'll realize something unsettling. Most of what surrounded you wasn't actually meant for the real you. It was designed to orbit your mask. You'll start noticing it in the little things first. The conversations that once seemed full now feel hollow. The gatherings that used to excite you now feel like noise. You'll catch yourself drifting away mid-sentence, wondering why you're still performing a role you've outgrown. And then it hits you. This version of life was never chosen. It was inherited from family, from culture, from fear. It was handed to you like a script. And you've been playing the part for so long that you forgot you never wrote it. The applause you received wasn't for who you are, but for how well you conformed. The promotion, the praise from parents who don't really know you, the love from partners who only ever loved your performance. When you begin to unravel that, you grieve, not because the performance is gone, but because it cost you so much to maintain. You see the friendships that were never built on depth, the support system that only existed as long as you stayed small, the opportunities that came not because you were aligned, but because you were agreeable. This is where the deep loneliness sets in, not because you're alone, but because you finally see. You see how much of your life was conditional. You see how many times you silenced your truth to keep the peace. You see how often you said yes while your soul screamed no. And here's the brutal truth. Once you see, you can't unsee. This is the heartbreak of awakening. It's not just waking up to your power, it's waking up to your past. All the versions of you that smiled through betrayal, that tolerated manipulation in the name of love, that called obligation, loyalty, and silence, wisdom. Those versions of you were brave. They were doing their best, but they weren't free. And now you're not willing to trade your soul for acceptance anymore. That's the shift. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence, with stillness, with evenings where you stare at the ceiling and whisper, "Who am I now?" That question isn't a crisis, it's a portal. Because what's coming isn't a new personality. It's a new frequency, a vibration that doesn't need explanation. It doesn't try to convince anyone. It just resonates. You walk into a room and you don't need to say a word. People feel it. Not because you're better, but because you're no longer hiding. There's a stillness in you now, a refusal to be rushed, a softness that doesn't bend to people-pleasing, a clarity that doesn't need validation. And the irony? Now that you're not performing, you finally attract what's real. Real conversation, real love, real purpose. Because the world no longer senses your desperation. It senses your alignment, and people are magnetized by it. They lean in closer, not because you're shouting, but because you're grounded. They ask questions, not because you're loud, but because you're present. You've stopped chasing, and in doing so, you've become the thing others chase. But here's the warning. Not everyone will celebrate your peace. Some will resent it, not because they hate you, but because they're still at war with themselves. Your calm reminds them of their chaos. Your boundaries remind them of their lack. Your authenticity highlights their mask. And so, they'll test you. They'll try to drag you back into old patterns. They'll accuse you of being cold, distant, selfish. But don't flinch, don't explain, don't shrink. Because this version of you isn't here to perform. It's here to embody the lessons the pain taught you, to embody the stillness you had to earn, to embody the truth that your worth was never tied to your usefulness. And the more you embody that, the more life bends around you. Not because you're controlling it, but because you're cooperating with your own current. You're no longer swimming against your own soul just to be liked. You're no longer trying to fit inside a life that doesn't feel like home. And that's when everything changes. Not instantly, not loudly, but deeply. You start saying no with grace. You start saying yes with intention. You start speaking less, but meaning more. You stop proving and start being. And the beautiful part? You start attracting others who are doing the same. They won't need you to explain your silence. They'll know. They won't ask you to shrink. They'll celebrate your expansion. They won't project their fears onto your journey. They'll walk beside you, quietly, steadily, in alignment. These are your people, not the ones who tolerated your mask, but the ones who honor your essence. And together, you won't need to perform. You won't need to edit your truth. You won't need to water down your fire. You'll just exist, unapologetically, honestly, fully. Because after all the chaos, the loss, the grief, the solitude, you've finally remembered who you are. And this time, you're not letting it go. When the programming breaks, so does your pace. You stop rushing toward goals that were never yours to begin with. You stop running in circles, trying to catch a version of happiness sold to you by broken systems. Suddenly, your ambition feels different. Not because you lost it, but because it's being redirected. The old world trained you to perform. It gave you scripts, roles, expectations, and rewarded you when you complied. It said, here is what success looks like. Here is how you should feel. Here is who you must become. But the moment you stopped identifying with those voices, everything that was built on them began to collapse. It's terrifying and liberating. You realize how much of your life was constructed out of fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being alone. Fear of disappointing those who built cages and called them home. And as those fears begin to dissolve, so does your dependency on external direction. You no longer ask, what do they want from me? You begin to ask, what do I need to honor myself? That shift isn't subtle, it's seismic. It affects everything. Your relationships start shaking under the weight of your new boundary. The ones who only knew how to love the version of you who said yes to everything, they begin to retreat. Some quiet, some violent, but none of them innocently. They are not reacting to your silence. They're reacting to the reflection you now hold up to them. You've become a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see when you no longer bend. Suddenly, you're the difficult one. You're too intense, too spiritual, too sensitive. But in reality, you've simply stopped being manipulatable. You've stopped being programmable. You've stopped accepting crumbs and calling it connection. This is the rebirth of discernment. You begin to hear the difference between I miss you and I miss controlling you, between I need you and I need access to your energy again, between I'm sorry and I just don't like the new you. Discernment is not judgment, it's clarity, and clarity is disruptive. You start choosing silence over explaining, rest over proving, depth over quantity. You begin to protect your energy not because you're fragile, but because you finally know your value. And your value isn't measured by how useful you are to others. It's measured by how aligned you are to yourself. This is when something beautiful happens. You become unrecognizable to the people who only knew the broken you, to the systems that thrived off your exhaustion, to the structures that benefited from your confusion. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, breathe differently, not because you've learned something new, but because you've unlearned everything that was false. It's not a glow-up, it's a soul-up, and it doesn't happen in a day. It happens in spirals. You'll revisit the same wounds, but with new eyes. You'll cry the same tears, but from a place of deeper truth. You'll lose things, But this time, you'll know they weren't really yours. In this part of the journey, grief becomes sacred. You grieve who you were, not because you want to return, but because you finally understand the weight that version of you had to carry. And you forgive that version for the tolerating, for the silence, for the overgiving. Forgiveness isn't a reward, it's a release. You no longer need vengeance. You no longer need closure from people who can't even apologize without justifying their harm. You no longer need the last word, because you're not trying to win anymore. You're trying to be whole. And wholeness is quiet. It doesn't need announcements. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't chase attention. It simply is. But don't mistake the quiet for weakness. Inside, that stillness is power. Power that doesn't react, but creates. Power that doesn't seek approval, but stands firm. Power that doesn't argue, but manifests. You start creating a life that matches your frequency, not your trauma, not your parents' expectation, not society's metric, just your truth. And that life looks different. It's slower, softer, simpler. You trade stimulation for presence. You trade performing for peace. You trade the crowd for alignment. And that's when the magic starts to reveal itself, not in big flashes, but in small confirmations. You start meeting people who see you. You start receiving opportunities that feel right. You start waking up and feeling light. Not because life is suddenly easy, but because you're no longer betraying yourself to make it easier for others. This is the true definition of spiritual power. To walk through a world built on illusion and remain rooted in your essence. To know that even if the world misunderstands you, you will not misunderstand yourself. And in this space, something sacred is reborn. Your trust in life. Not because it gives you what you want, but because it aligns you with what you are. That's the home you've been looking for. Not a place, not a person, but a frequency. And now that you've found it, you're not going back. There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when you realize that your silence is no longer a sign of weakness, but a signal of transformation. Not everyone will notice. Not everyone is meant to. Because the most powerful shifts don't announce themselves with thunder. They arrive like breath, like still water, like the kind of peace that doesn't need explanation to exist. You stop responding to chaos, not because you don't feel it, but because you've learned that some battles exist only to bait your energy. You stop chasing people to understand you, not because you've become cold, but because you've finally understood your truth does not need permission to exist. You are no longer available for manipulation disguised as love. You are no longer reachable through guilt, obligation, or fear. You are no longer auditioning for roles you never wanted to play. And this scares people, especially those who once thrived off your availability, your compliance, your emotional labor. They can't find the old version of you anymore, and that unsettles them. Not because they miss you, but because they miss their ability to control you. This is the part of the journey no one warns you about, when your healing becomes a threat, when your silence begins to echo louder than your words ever did, when your peace becomes more provocative than your pain, when your lack of reaction becomes a mirror so clear, others have no choice but to confront their own shadows. It's not personal, it's energetic. You've become a frequency they can no longer access without rising to meet it, and that is terrifying for those who are not ready to evolve. But you didn't come here to stay small. You didn't come here to keep shrinking just to be digestible. You came here to remember, to rise, to radiate. And so now, you're quieter, but deeper, softer, but stronger, less seen, but more powerful. You walk into rooms and don't need to say a word, because your energy enters first. You become the stillness people feel, but can't name. The presence that shifts atmospheres without trying. The one who no longer begs to be heard, because silence has become your loudest voice. This is what true alignment feels like. You don't need to be understood to feel grounded. You don't need to be validated to feel worthy. You don't need to be seen to know you are real. And as you embody this truth, something unexpected happens. Your external world begins to reflect your internal one. You stop chasing. You start attracting. People who match your frequency begin to appear, quietly, like whispers from the universe. Opportunities align themselves without force. Solutions find you without panic. Doors open, not because you banged on them, but because you became the key. You no longer fight for space. You are the space. Your energy becomes selective, not from arrogance, but from reverence. You honor your time, your peace, your intuition. You protect your boundaries not to isolate, but to preserve the sanctity of your becoming. And the people who are meant for you, they won't be threatened by that. They'll be drawn to it. Because the right ones don't fear your silence. They understand it. They don't try to fix your stillness. They respect it. They don't shrink in your presence. They rise with it. This is the reward no one talks about. Not riches, not applause, not power, but resonance. The feeling of being seen without having to perform. The relief of being chosen without having to chase. The joy of being loved without having to explain your scars. But this only happens after the silence, after the shedding, after the sacred withdrawal from a world that conditioned you to forget who you were. So if you're there now, floating in that strange space between no longer and not yet, don't rush it. Don't rush your silence. It is doing a holy work inside you. It is not emptiness. It is recalibration. You are not invisible. You are being refined. You are not without direction. You are being rerouted, and soon the world will see what was always there, but hidden beneath all that noise, your unshakable, undeniable, and unapologetic light. Let them wonder. Let them feel uneasy. Let them sit with the mystery of your silence, because what they don't realize is that you're not gone. You've simply outgrown the need to be loud in a world that no longer deserves your noise. You've become the storm after the calm, the power behind the pause, the presence that doesn't need permission. And that, more than anything else, is what they fear. Not your voice, but the silence that now holds your soul.